This is Baltimore City Council Judiciary and Legislative Investigations Committee. We are here for Council Bill LO 18-0035, Legislative Oversight, Druid and Ashburton Reservoir Projects. I'm joined to my left by Councilman Leon Pinkett, 9th District, member of the committee. Councilman Robert Stokes, 12th District, member of the committee. Councilman Ed Reisinger, 10th District, member of the committee. Councilman John Bullock, 9th District, member of the committee. Councilman Brandon Scott, 2nd District, member of the committee. Also have Matt Peters to my immediate right, staff to the committee. Liam Davis, staff to Council President Jack Young. Rebecca Tabb, who's General Counsel to the City Council. Representing Mayor Catherine Pugh is Karen Stokes and Karan Banks from the Mayor's Office of Government Relations. We've also been joined by Kara Kuntz, Legislative Director to Council President Jack Young. Before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to the chief sponsor of the bill, Councilman Leon Pinkett, for brief remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Costello. In 2006, the Environmental Protection Agency issued what is called the Long-Term 2 Enhanced Surface Water Treatment Rule. This rule required that in order to protect our open drinking water reservoirs, that either additional chemicals be added to them or that they be covered to prevent any threat of contamination. This rule, which would impact the water facilities throughout Baltimore, including both the Druid and Ashburton Reservoir, was intended to initiate projects that would build up and secure the public's confidence that our drinking supplies would be safe and preserved. From my opinion, it is unfortunate that as we look back over these two projects in particular, that more has been done to erode the public confidence and trust than to restore it. Over the past year concerning these projects, we've experienced more stops than starts as time and time again we have undergone issues with turbidity, potential soil contamination, and inconsistencies and uncertainties in protocols and community engagement. In the Druid and Ashburton projects alone, we're talking about an almost $300 million investment of public funds, an investment that should not only protect our water supply for generations to come, but should have also yielded a boost to the local economy through the support of local firms and local hiring. At the bare minimum, the public should have an expectation that we are being sound stewards of our precious financial resources, vigilant in how we protect and monitor our natural resources, and stalwart in how we guard each constituent by making certain that their safety and well-being are placed above all else. In too many instances during these projects, I'm of the opinion that we've been derelict in our responsibility. Today's hearing provides for us an opportunity to get an update on the current status of these projects, an analysis of missteps in the past, and a clear path for moving these projects forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilman, for your leadership on this. With that, I'd like to turn it over to DPW. Colleagues, everyone should have a hard copy of the presentation. Does everyone have one? Marcia, if you could kick things off, and I would ask that DPW keep their presentation to 15 minutes if possible. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Please introduce everyone.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Marcia Collins, representing the Department of Public Works. Today I have with me, of course, Kristen Oldendorf of my team, and Lauren Sawicki, who is going to be presenting the presentation that you have before you. We've attempted to keep the presentation to a minimum so that you can get to your questions and concerns. It's our desire to continue to listen and to try and make sure that everybody has a comfort level when they leave here that what it is we're doing and how we're going to continue to communicate going forward. So having said that, if I may, I'd like Lauren to come up and...
Chairman, can I just ask a quick question? Please. Where's Director Chow?
Director Chow, I don't know.
It wasn't anticipated that he would present this evening?
No. I apologize if you were under that impression, Councilman. Usually if the council wants the director here, they let us know and we make sure we try to get in his calendar. I'm not sure where he is today. I know that there were a couple of meetings that he was to be on that he wasn't in today either, so I apologize. I do not know.
Okay.
That is my fault.
Maybe the error was on our fault. In our assumption that two projects of such significance to the city and to our general public welfare would warrant his attention. I didn't think that we would even have to make a special request because of the nature of these two projects. But so maybe the fault is on our end to make that we didn't stress that.
So for a legislative oversight, when we don't really have a lot of, we're not looking at a bill or a resolution, sometimes it's unclear to me what the expectations are. So I apologize for that confusion. Believe me, he feels these are important. We wouldn't be doing them if they weren't. But I feel that Lauren here will be able, because she is head of the Office of Engineering and Construction, is well prepared to answer questions. If there are more things that we need to do as a result of concerns expressed here this evening that we need to get back, we will absolutely do so. But I apologize. It was not his disinterest in any way. So if I may, Mr.
Please.
Chairman, I'd like Lauren Sawicki to come up and to just go briefly through the presentation so that we can all get oriented. And for those of you who may not be as familiar with the projects as Councilman Pinkett, and then we could get right to questions and testimony. Thank you very much.
All right, so let's get started. For these two projects, as Councilman Pinkett described, we're complying with the Safe Water Drinking Act, and the city has elected to cover all of the finished water drinking reservoirs in the city. Druid Lake consists of one 400-foot and one 500-foot diameter covered water storage tank. And the Ashburton tanks are two 434-foot diameter covered tanks. At both locations, at the end of the project, we're going to provide an aeration system in the lakes so that lakes can remain as a recreational use for the community. After that, we're going to have site restoration at both projects and improvements to both of the park areas. So from the project schedules, the notice to proceed for Druid was in April 2017, and the scheduled completion is February 2022. For Ashburton, the notice to proceed was May 2018, with a scheduled completion of November 2022. For the project, the MBWB goals are set as they are a state-funded project. So because it's a grant loan recipient of the state's DBE program, the goals are 18% for MBDBE and 16% for WBDBE. It still remains that all of the subcontractors must be pre-qualified with the city to work on the project. So we also wanted to let you know who the contractor intends is using as the subcontractors and where these companies are located, so you can see that most of them are in Maryland. So for local hiring, the requirement is that at least 51% of new jobs required to complete the contract comply with MOED and are with Baltimore City residents. Both contractors have met with the MOED office and are in compliance. The new jobs created are listed on the page, 19 that are Baltimore City residents for Druid and 14 that are Baltimore City residents for Ashburton. And both are in compliance with over 51% of new jobs created being with Baltimore City residents. Our community outreach for the project actually started for Druid in February 2012 and for Ashburton in October 2013. So both projects started well before the design phase to involve the community, engage Rexon Park, CHAP, and we even created a fountain advisory committee for the Druid project. We intend on continuing our community outreach throughout the project and holding monthly meetings to address any needs that the community has so they can address those at the time during construction. So very quickly, here's the existing site at Druid. And we're really only impacting the area in the west part of the lake. So the improvements to Druid include walkways, benches, paths, restoration of the fountain in the middle, which is what the Fountain Advisory Committee was a part of. And for Ashburton, there's the existing site. You can see we're working at the top part of the site, north of the lake. The improvements to this site include a new entrance, playground, picnic area, multi-purpose field, and south of the lake, not shown, are 2 tennis courts and basketball courts that we are going to be adding. So I'll open it up to any questions or concerns that you may have at this time.
Councilman Stokes?
I just have a question. The two tanks, approximately how many acres of land is going to be used to store the tanks? One. The second one, that is going to be the drinking water that's in the tanks that the resident Baltimore City going to be using?
Yes, the drinking water is going to be in the tanks that the city will be using.
And how much acres? I know
The
that's-
acres I don't have with me. We can get that to you if you'd like.
And that was determined by the size of the tanks or how much water?
That's correct, the size of the tanks and by how much water they would hold.
Okay, thank you.
Lauren, is the Druid Reservoir currently online?
No, the Druid Reservoir was actually taken offline during construction of the Coffer Dam. We wanted to make sure that we were providing a high-quality water, and we proactively took the lake offline so we didn't risk providing high turbidity water into the system.
Could it have remained online while the work was going on?
I'm not sure. I wasn't here during that time. We can find that out for you and see when it could have remained online and could have been offline.
I know that there were times during the work where the work was stopped or halted or the reservoir was taken offline because of turbidity. Can you tell me, what happened as far as the work stoppages and its impact on the reservoir?
I don't think it really had any impact on the reservoir.
Okay.
We were monitoring the turbidity. We didn't want it to get too high and then not be able to bring it back down again. So when it reached a certain level, they stopped work to make sure that we could get the turbidity under control. But the lake was never open to the public at those times as drinking water.
But could it have been?
I don't know. Like I said, I'm not sure of the times that it could have been or could not have been.
So who do I ask this question?
We can
Ms.
find out from,
Collins?
it's an operations, we can find out from operations for you.
I mean, you weren't here. Why have a hearing if I can't get questions answered during the hearing?
I need to know what, I'm misunderstanding your question. Are you saying, should we have allowed the water to be used while the
Could it
turbidity-
have been used?
Well,
Was there any point where the water was compromised or where it couldn't have been used?
well, let me start by answering it this way, Councilman. Turbidity levels are an important part of what we test every day, multiple times a day for all three of our water filtration plants. And the reason why turbidity is important is because those particles that are suspended in the water column can carry things with them that we wouldn't want to be drinking. So this is something part of our permits with the state of Maryland. So for a lake the size of Druid to get that turbidity to a level that we would feel comfortable putting into the system, we were waiting over time and we weren't seeing it come down. So we did not want to release it at any time because we didn't know if that turbidity level would start increasing again. So we were not comfortable at the time putting it into the drinking water system.
So did Druid become, and excuse me if I'm using the wrong words, did the turbidity increase just as a natural course, or was it increased because of work that was being done associated with the project?
Sure, it was actually stimulated by the construction, absolutely.
And so were there protocols put in place prior to the project initiating that would minimize the amount of turbidity that would be in the reservoir? Or was it expected that it would go up to a level that would make it necessary to shut it down? Was that a part of the process?
Sure, the specifications stipulate what should be done to protect it so that we could continue to use the lake. But if that's not happening, or if we're detecting these elevated levels, we don't want to put it in the distribution system. It just doesn't make sense.
So are we satisfied with the measures that were implemented by the contractor to minimize the amount of turbidity in the reservoir?
The contractor did everything we asked of him.
But did it yield the results that we were hoping?
Not to the extent that we wanted.
So are we saying that the contractor did what we asked them to do? So what I'm trying to get at is that the lake, the turbidity in the reservoir increased to a level that one, the lake would have to be shut off for human consumption, but I believe also that could have also jeopardized the future of the reservoir. So who made the call in order, as far as the protocol, for what would be done to prevent that?
Okay, I apologize, I didn't understand. You said it would jeopardize the lake itself? Or what,
So if turbidity reaches a certain level, would it have jeopardized the future of the reservoir?
No, it doesn't jeopardize the future of the reservoir. What the issue is always for us every day, there's a lot of things that can contribute to turbidity, and so that everything that we're doing with our sampling all 24/7 is making sure that we are meeting all of our permit limits. Now, that water that is sitting in that lake has already gone through the filtration process. However, we don't want to be using that water if the turbidity levels are not where we want to see them, because we feel it would be irresponsible on our part to do so. So it was just a matter of, this is what happened during the construction. It didn't make sense to utilize that water. We tried a number of things. It was taking a long time for that turbidity level to come down to a comfort level that we felt would be responsible to put in the distribution system, so we just took it offline.
And please forgive me.
Sure.
I guess what I'm not understanding is that we knew that we were going to be doing this project. I'm assuming that we charted some course of action that would cause the least amount of impact on the reservoir, so that turbidity wouldn't increase above a certain level. I guess what I'm not hearing, did the process or protocol that we selected, did it prevent the lake from reaching a high level of turbidity, or did it not?
Well, it obviously didn't, because the turbidity levels went up and we weren't comfortable where they were.
So was that our error in our choice of protocol, or was it error in the implementation of the strategy?
We're looking at that now to see what may have been the root cause of that.
So when do we expect to have an answer? Because I think that's a big difference between either is this DPW making the decision on this is the course of action, or did the contractor do something that caused the lake to have more turbidity than it should have? I think it's important to know, what's the cause.
Yes, and we are investigating that now. I don't know when that will be done, but we'd be glad to get that to you when we have finished the investigation. I think what we need to keep in mind is that whenever you're doing construction, you have unintended consequences that can occur, or you encounter situations in the field that weren't what you were expecting. So you always have to be able to manage what's happening. I think that the important thing for us is we didn't want to worry about who was responsible for what when we were having the problem. We just didn't want to distribute that water when it was at those levels. So for us, it was an easy decision to, not an easy decision, but it was an important decision to make, that we do not use water that could be compromised. So for me, the most important thing is we didn't distribute that water, regardless of what it meant for us. I mean, it's important. That's number one. We cannot send into the distribution system water that we don't have a confidence level in. So for us, that's the most important thing. We will go back and see what may or may not have transpired to have stimulated that to happen, or maybe it just was going to happen anyway. Maybe we didn't consider everything. I don't know that yet, but we are investigating it. But I really want to leave you with the understanding that regardless of whose fault it is, we as being responsible for the water system cannot send out bad water. So that, to me, that was the overriding concern.
Right, and I appreciate that, and that was the right course of action.
Yes.
To protect them. But I think it's still important for us to understand if, the contractor that we selected for a project that's about $150 million followed either proper protocols.
Correct.
Or did what was. That's important, especially when
Yes.
this same contractor is doing other jobs for the city.
I respect that, and yes, we are looking at that now. I just can't tell you what the results of that investigation will yield yet.
And Chairman, if I could just ask one other question. And so, in my simple thinking, when I think of turbidity, I think of maybe having a bottle of some kind of liquid that has, a substance, and if you shake it, it mixes around. But if you let it just sit there,
Like chocolate
after
milk.
a while, it will settle to the
like
bottom.
chocolate milk
Right.
when you would-
So what are we doing to reduce the turbidity in the water to a level where it can be consumed by the public? Are we just waiting for the soil or whatever or particles to settle to the bottom? What do we?
Well, number one, we're just taking the lake offline. We're just not going to draw water from it. So we're just not going to worry about that part because we don't want to have to constantly check and see, well, it's not happening fast enough. We need to go ahead with the project, so we're just taking it completely offline. And we just will continue to monitor. Some of it may be that the bottom sediments were stirred up as a result of the activity. It may be something that simple, or it could be something a little more complicated.
So there's nothing else we do. We just let it sit and then test it. We don't try to remove the particles out of it. We don't.
No, we're actually draining the lake so we can replace the water.
So what do we? So we're draining it. So what do we refill it with?
Our good water.
Folks, can you please make sure that your cell phones are on silent or off or vibrate or just something that doesn't make noise? Please and thank you.
So what happens with the water that's drained out?
It has to be treated before it's discharged. So it goes into a storm drain. The chlorine is removed and other admins, and that's done under MDE supervision.
So how many gallons of water does the lake hold?
Oh, that I can't.
A lot. So
Plenty.
So are we?
More than 10 gallons.
So we're just throwing away.
Well, you're not throwing it away. I mean, it's not.
So we're going to take it and we're going to retreat it, and then it can be used again.
No, what I mean is, it's not usable, and to try and get all that sedimentation out of there now would take a long time. So we're just going to drain it out and put in fresh water.
So what do you do with unusable water?
In this instance, it's being sent into a storm drain after it has been dechlorinated and meets all the standards of MDE to discharge.
So it's being thrown away.
I wouldn't call it throwing away. It's going back into the water cycle, let's put it that way. It's like anything else. You have a water main break, or you fight a fire, you're just not.
It was water that was intended for human consumption,
Yes.
that no longer will be able to be consumed by.
We have decided that we would rather just replenish it than try to.
And so how many
Make it
gallons
work.
of water is that?
I don't know, I'll have to get that for you.
And one thing, and this is my last point that makes this even more critical, if we think back to this past winter when we had all these water pipes busting and how the supply of water for our city was being challenged, what if we wouldn't have had access to, what if we wouldn't have had access, I don't even know if we did, but what if we had gotten to the point where we needed the Druid Reservoir and it wouldn't even been available to us? That could have been.
So we look at all of that with our 3 water filtrations plants to make sure that we are able to back it up. I mean, obviously, we would prefer to have it, but it's not a matter of, for us, it's just public safety. You just don't want to use it.
Just so I understand, once the water is dechlorinated and then emptied into the stormwater system, 2 quick questions. One, how is the lake refilled? I mean, it's not like you just hook up a hose to the side of a house and start pouring water in there.
There's infrastructure that feeds that lake directly.
Okay.
Underground infrastructure.
Okay.
That's how the water gets there in the first place.
Got it.
Okay.
Can we also, can you monetize the cost to refill the lake? When you give us the total number of gallons?
Once we have the gallons, yes, we
Yeah.
could.
I'd be curious
Simple math.
to know how much that figure is.
And a follow-up question, that water, once it's dechlorinated and it ends up in the stormwater system and empties into the harbor and subsequently the bay, are there any environmental issues there, or once MDE kind of signs off on it, it's...
MDE tells us exactly what we have to do, we have to meet it, and then they approve it, so that's what we've done.
Okay, thank you.
I have more questions, but I want to respect my colleagues.
Councilman Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you both for being here tonight, ladies. Do you have so I can see this diagram, and I know that I've talked to Councilman Pinkett about it a little bit, but do you guys have a better version of what you expect all the improvements at both Druid and Ashburn to look like in a form that you can show us to see what these places are going to look like once all the construction is done?
You mean like a rendering of
Yeah,
it? Yeah, we
rendering.
have a couple renderings we can provide to you.
But you guys didn't bring those tonight?
No, we didn't have them here tonight.
Okay, because because I can see some of the improvements that are going on. Just want to know, like, what ultimately is going to be done with the facility so that we can see the kind of improvements that you
Sure.
guys are going to be making. But can you talk about them?
Sure,
like
of course.
What you expect to see there, what kind of activities you expect to see happen at both Druid and Ashburton?
Mhm. At Ashburton, we're providing them a new entrance. On top of the tanks, we're not allowed to have tree plantings within 10 feet of the tank so the root system doesn't compromise our water system. So we're going to provide a multi-purpose field on top of the tanks to be used with football goalposts at each of the ends so that the kids can play on the fields. We're going to provide a nice picnic area with a pavilion, some tables, and a few fitness stations that are around the park. We're also providing 2 tennis courts and a basketball court that are near the southeast side of the lake.
There's basketball courts there already.
Those basketball courts are going to be demolished, and we're providing brand new ones for the community.
Okay, good. It's very hot on those basketball courts. I know that from experience. And what about at Druid?
At Druid, let's see. So at Druid, one of the issues was the fountain in the center of the lake. The community expressed that they really wanted to keep that fountain there and keep that fountain in use, so we're going to protect the fountain during construction, and then they're going to restore the fountain a bit so it stays in its characteristics as it was. They're going to fix up the walking path around and provide benches and podium area for a stage and nice park entrance and restore some of the features that were originally there.
So I have just a follow-up question. So have you guys ever thought about, I know that we do this down in South Baltimore, but in some places, for example, in Howard County, where I was spending a lot of time, for example, in Centennial Park, they have a lake like this where they actually use it for people to kayak and boat and things like that in a community that is not in a harbor or downtown. Have you guys thought about that kind of usage for Druid?
Yes, of course. Yeah, that's why we're going to put the aeration systems in both the lakes to maintain the water quality in the lakes so that algae doesn't grow and that so it can be used by Rexham Park as a recreational lake for both of them.
So you have the question is, have you had that conversation with Rec and Parks already?
Yes,
To see how
yes,
it's
and
going?
that these parks will be turned over to them and they will be facilitating the use of the lakes.
And most importantly, have you make sure that those conversations include Councilman Pinkett so that he can make sure that it meets the needs of the community?
Of course, yeah, we can talk about all those things. Yep.
And thank you. I'm done, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Bullock?
Yes, good evening, and thank you. Just really quickly, you mentioned the time frame as well as the cost. Do you foresee, or have there been any delays or any cost overruns that you might project?
I'm not sure of any cost overruns. The delays for the cofferdam, like Marcia alluded to, we did have to start and then pause as we wanted to wait for the turbidity for the lakes to go down. We're waiting on the recovery schedule from the contractor right now to see if he can catch up his schedule to where he's supposed to be.
So you're still sort of aiming for March of 2022, but you're not quite certain if the contract has to catch up. So
That's
you're
correct,
still uncertain
yeah.
at this point.
Yeah, and we're going to help him all he can to catch up to where he's supposed to be.
Okay.
Councilman Pinkett?
Laura, who's the contractor for the Ashburton project?
Ashburton is Oscarenda.
Same contractor for?
Yes, sir.
Have there been any delays related to the Ashburton project?
The Ashburton project, no significant delays that I'm aware of that would impact their schedule.
Are they currently working?
No, not right now,
Why not?
because the community was concerned with soil samples that were taken, And out of an abundance of caution, we retested the soil samples, and we have received confirmation from MDE that the topsoil and soil samples are within health limits and are from naturally occurring materials in the soil.
And so what was the concern related to the soil sample?
The concern were high levels of chromium, so then the subcontractor went back out and had the soil samples retested, and it was split into the two types of chromium, and it found that once it was split into the two types of chromium, both levels of chromium were within the acceptable limits.
So what's the difference? What were the two types of chromium?
Hexavalent chromium and chromium-3. So hexavalent chromium is the one that people are concerned about, and they found that it was within the acceptable limits.
And so what would be the concern about hexavalent chromium?
Meaning?
What health impacts what would a community be concerned about?
At these levels, nothing. There is no concern. These levels are about 75% below what remediation would ask for.
And so what, if they had elevated to a level to be concerned, what would be the concerns related to hexavalent chromium?
I'm not sure. We can get you the health effects for larger than acceptable limits.
Is hexavalent chromium, is it a carcinogen?
Can't speak to that.
Okay. So what were the levels that the soil tested at?
For the chromium? Let me see. No, I don't have the exact levels with me, but as I said in our previous meeting, that we are going to have a meeting with the community prior to the contractor continuing work to inform the community of the findings of our consultant after reviewing the soil samples and in conjunction with MDE's review.
So what's the level that would require a cleanup standard according to MDE?
I don't have that with me. I mean, we were 75% below that level.
What are the standards? What's the cleanup standard for EPA?
I don't have that with me.
So am I to believe that an engineer in this field would know what the MDE and EPA standards are for this type of substance when I've only been versed in this for less than a month, and I can probably give you what those standards are.
I mean, I guess they would know if they could look them up and tell you them. I mean, I could look up the table and tell you what they
MDE
are.
standard is 23. Do we know where our tests fell in? So it would be 75% less than 23?
Mm-hmm.
So that's like 5 or 6?
That's correct.
And so 5 or 6 doesn't elevate to the level that we should be concerned.
That's correct.
Do we know what the EPA standard is? Is this an EPA project or is this a state project?
This is a state project,
Where does most of the money for the project come from?
state funding.
What role does EPA have in this project?
EPA, none that I'm aware of. It's
I mean,
MDE.
when you go past the site, it says it's an EPA project. I mean, like a big sign that's almost as big as this desk says it's an EPA project.
It says it's an I'm not sure.
It is a project that is driven by EPA standards under the Clean Water Act, if that's what you're referring to.
So what's the EPA standards? Because we're clear about what the MDE standards, which is 23, but
Oh, you're talking about the chromium. I thought you were talking about the project.
yes. But I mean, if it's a project that is governed by EPA's standards for health, for safe drinking water, do we pick and choose which standard we use as it relates to?
No. I mean, any standard that we're going against would be an EPA standard. They set the standards.
Right.
So it's not the state of Maryland that's setting the standard. It's the Environmental Protection Agency that sets the standard.
So does anybody know what the standard is for EPA as it relates to hexavalent chromium?
I'm confused now because I thought you said you knew what the standard was.
I do.
So,
So it's 0.3 for residential and 6.3 for industrial. And so our readings came in lower than the MDE standard, but higher than the EPA standard.
I will go back and check, Councilman, but I'm not aware that there's an MDE standard versus an EPA standard. We're following the EPA standards, to my understanding.
My understanding is that there is a difference, and that the MDE standard is less restrictive than the EPA standard.
All right, well, we'll double check on that. Thank you.
I mean, it's,
But, you know, like I said, we will have this meeting with the community prior to the contractor starting up again, so we'll make sure all this information's out there before we let them resume work on the site.
so how do we, so work is not being done at the Ashburton site because there was potential contaminants in the soil, and so we stopped until we got a better understanding of what was in the soil. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, we heard the community's response to it, so we wanted to be understanding of what the community felt, and we didn't want to put them in an uncomfortable position. So we said, we're going to stop, we're going to take samples of the soil, and we're going to make sure that everything's okay before we move forward with the project.
So are we saying that the concern was raised by the community but not by DPW?
No, because we saw that the levels of the soil were within the limits.
And when did you find this out?
We found this out when you brought it to our attention. The contractor did not submit us the documentation.
Was there any testing by DPW prior to this?
No, because the land has been owned by DPW since I think about 1863 or Baltimore City. So it was not used as any other industrial purpose prior to Baltimore City acquiring the property.
When you say the land was, you saying the park was owned by DPW? The
Or
entire?
Baltimore City since I think it was 1863.
But we live in a city that has a history for dumping contaminated soil in various parts of the city. So even though a site might not have had an industrial use, there's in this town anyway, there's great potential that the soil, especially when we talk about parks, could potentially have contaminated soil.
Sure, and that's why we were concerned, so that's why we stopped and we said, okay, if you're concerned, we're going to retest it to make sure. But the MD landfills and landfill areas will not accept the soil unless it meets their standards. So we would have been alerted to it at that time when MD would not have accepted the soil for landfill.
So when DPW did its initial test, did it just do a phase 1 or did it do a phase 2 testing? Or what was the pre-work to even before construction would have even started?
Sure, they usually do a background check, so they do a geological test and they do a historical background to see if there's potential for these types of contaminants at the site, and they found that through their background that there was no potential for contaminants at this site because it was not used for industrial purposes.
So we made the determination that just a historical study of the site would have been sufficient.
That's correct.
Okay.
We have folks signed up to testify, starting with James Haynes. I'll ask that members of the public please keep their testimony to 2 minutes if possible. Mr. Haynes and anyone else testifying, please be sure to speak into the microphone because this is being televised. Otherwise, the folks at home that are watching on TV won't be able to hear you. You can move that mic up.
All right.
Yeah, right on top of it.
All right.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is James Haynes, and I'm president of the Hanlon Improvement Association. I must say that I've been involved with this process now through the Hanlon Improvement Association for more than 3 years. And we support what the city is doing at this particular point to satisfy any environmental concerns with our water supply in this city. However, there were 3 items in particular that we are in the Handling Improvement Association concerned about. One of which is the memorandum of understanding that we submitted to DPW that we wanted to have signed, as has been the case with other projects, specific the Guilford project, signed a memorandum of understanding prior to commencing work on the Guilford Reservoir. I believe that to date we have not received or have not had a signed agreement from the city on this project. In that MOU, we expressed concerns about how contaminated soil is taken from the site and transported perhaps to other sites. And I believe we were under the impression, and we thought we had an understanding through prior meetings, that all soil will be removed from that site and not stored on the site during this period. We also have concerns with how boulders or rocks, if you may, are crushed on that site. It's my understanding that some of those rocks may be laden with asbestos, and that could pose a danger to the surrounding community. I live across the street from the Lake Ashburton Reservoir, and I am concerned as a citizen in that area, and I'm concerned for other people in my community, for their health and safety. So these are issues, and I'm not going to prolong it by talking about it, because we have two representatives here, Linda Batts, who is the vice president of the association, and Portia Smith, who have been appointed by our community to be our liaison persons between the community and the Department of DPW and this project. So if you don't mind, sir, I would like for Linda Batts to come up and speak, if that okay.
Yeah, she's next. Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you.
Bats.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone this evening? Good. I'm delighted to be here to share my perspective on a topic that I believe is of paramount concern. That is the Department of Public Works and its oversight of a federally mandated project. A project that has implications not only for environmentalists, but also those attuned to issues of environmental justice and the equity topic that this council has discussed in many previous sessions. When it comes to clean water and safe air, the public should feel confident that the entities responsible for ensuring our welfare are advocating on our behalf, not taking shortcuts and engaging in double talk when it comes to helping the public understand what is at stake. And I have to tell you that while personally I know that DPW is doing some fine work, I also have to tell you that the press is replete with troubling stories about DPW. Time management, conferences and travel, the high cost of water, late water bills, overbilling, failed sewage lines, delays in complying with the sewage consent decree, backups in residential homes, underreporting of sewage spills into the Jones Falls, and concerns with our reservoirs. No taxpayer should have to appeal to the government to do the right thing. This is an inherent part of their obligation. I understand that MDE revised its levels in May 2018 regarding chromium and hexavalent chromium. And so being a layperson and not an expert, I would want to understand, perhaps in a side-by-side viewpoint, what MDE standard is for acceptable levels and tolerable levels of chromium and hexavalent chromium, and what the EPA's standards are with respect to the same. Have they always been static, or did a change occur in May of 2018? And if so, what is that change? And when it comes to a federally mandated project, Why is it that we're dealing with discrepancies at the state level that don't necessarily comport with perceived requirements at the federal level? These are things we need to get a handle on and understand. It's clear to me that the Centers for Disease Control, among other entities, has said that hexavalent chromium is linked to cancer. And thus, when it comes to a project of this scope and magnitude, the dust, air, and water needs to be monitored. When we see dirt stockpiled, as it currently is in Hanlon Park, dirt that is reported to contain alleged chromium, whether hexavalent or trivalent chromium, among other contaminants, we need to be sure that everyone who is on the city payroll, the state payroll, and the federal payroll has taken the proper precautions with respect to the city and the taxpayers. Have we kept it from leaching? To ensure that Hanlon Park is restored as a safe recreational park, we have been very clear all along. We want this landfill of potentially contaminated soil excavated. Until that time, we want it contained. We want all of the soil removed and dumped in a properly certified site, and we want clean soil brought in. We do not want the same soil that has been taken out, recycled, and redelivered back to us. And that is what we asked for when this project began. And in the face of the concerns that bring us here today, we reiterate and state that again. As our president indicated, we do not want any boulders crushed in Hanlon Park. We are less concerned about the new toys that the contractor has to do the job and more about air quality issues in the city of Baltimore. We do not want to risk our children, our seniors, those who have respiratory problems, our pets, our wildlife, anyone to potential air contaminants. And it's important for us to continue to measure our air quality and our soil quality and our water quality while this is going on. We understand that Baltimore has a real problem and is ranked very highly with respect to poor air quality. So it seems that our concerns regarding the management of this project and the approach to this project are spot on. No crushing of the boulders in the park. We've asked as well that you share critical information regarding the contractor's employment profile and experience with similar projects, and whether there have been any employment and environmental complaints and litigation regarding past and present projects. We would have expected a rigorous review in this regard. This contractor is going to be a part of our life, our community, for 3 to 5 years, and we certainly want to make sure that there are no shortcuts that have been taken in terms of their past portfolio of work, and that there will be no potential compromises with respect to their approach to the current project. And the reason that why we find this particularly concerning is in light of a reported complaint against the contractor, the same contractor, for 55 miles of pavement and roads removed that left the city of Biloxi, Mississippi with dust and dangerous conditions. The Gulf Restoration Network filed suit against the contractor because of these alleged violations of the Clean Water Act, because polluted dirt from the roadway that they had excavated has fallen into their Biloxi back bay. We don't want shortcuts or turned eyes on this project. This is our community, our city, and we expect DPW to provide the proper oversight for completion of these projects. I'm absolutely curious about whether or not there's any correlation between an increase in the rate of water bills for citizens of Baltimore City and the costs that are now associated with dealing with this water issue in Druid Hill Park. Are we paying for someone else's mistakes? How can the public really get a better handle of what these costs are being attributed to? Now, we also understand that DPW has a water mentoring program for youth started in 2015. Congratulations. But I would ask, how many of the youth that have matriculated into this water mentoring program are part of this multi-million-dollar contract and are receiving employment benefits as a result of it? I have heard, as I have listened to many of the hearings here at City Hall, Councilwoman Middleton talk about apprenticeship programs. The Clean Water Act, Safe Drinking Act came out decades ago. We had an opportunity to get our planners together, our business enterprise departments together, to develop strategies to get minority and women businesses and other businesses on the front line of training, to be in the pipeline for opportunities that are now missed. We can't recover that and give that back to a community that needs this opportunity, these opportunities, to remain vibrant and strong. So when I look out across the lake at the work being done and participate in update meetings, I want to see people in the room with the right skills, but I also want to see people that represent the diversity of our community. Will we see that happen? We'd like to have some assurances with respect to that. And for DPW, and specifically for Director Chow, coming from the standpoint of a retired federal executive, this boils down to trust and leadership. We've witnessed the horror at Flint. We know about Erin Brockovich. We don't want to become them, or do we? DPW has had opportunities to consult with the experts. Have they coordinated any of these tests and discussions with our health commissioner, with risk management personnel from MDE, the Army Corps of Engineers, or Hopkins for that matter? What opinions have they shared? And why is there not transparency in the information sharing process? I've mentioned before that Baltimore's air quality is reported to be in the top 10 worst of cities. How often will the air quality be tested, particularly during the approach to these multi-year projects? What is the frequency? And I'm also troubled that even though DPW reports that Baltimore's water quality is fine, DPW has made the decision to reduce lead and copper testing in sampled homes from 100 samplings once a year to now 50 samplings every 3 years. So what we have here is an environment where you've got a lot of disturbance to the soil and water, and DPW making a decision to pull back on the frequency of water testing and also the population of samples tested.
Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to
Coming to a
respectfully
close.
wrap up. Thank you.
Bringing it to a close. So I say that in the face of the concerns regarding our air quality, our soil quality, and the Clean Water Act, we ask that DPW not put the brakes on, but keep its foot on the accelerator. We want the memorandum of understanding. We don't want rock stockpiled in our community. We want the blasting to occur elsewhere. We want the soil removed and fresh soil removed. And we want to continue to work with DPW to ensure that the requirements of the federal act that we're overseeing comes to fruition safely for Baltimore and our citizens in the Hanlon community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Batts. Before we go any further, Lauren, I just got a couple quick questions for clarification, if we could. So it sounds like there's a difference between the EPA and the MDE standards for what's acceptable for various testing of various compounds or chemicals or material, whatever we want to call these things. And I don't expect you to know this, and I certainly don't know what's an acceptable level of chromium-3 or any other variation of chromium for that matter. That being said, can we get something from the law department telling us whether or not, because Councilman Pinkett raised a really good point, and it sounds like there's some varying levels. We get some clarification on when there's a variation between what EPA is asking for or demanding or saying must be met versus what MDE is asking for, how that's resolved. and I don't know if that's resolved through who the sponsor of the project is, but I would think that any project would have to comply with all local, state, and federal guidelines. So if there's a discrepancy between MDE and EPA, that this point would not be, DPW would not be at fault, and there's something that MDE probably needs to figure out because they're not in compliance with the EPA, or maybe the state is permitted to have stricter standards than EPA, and then the question is, what is the expectation of a DPW project? Does it have to meet the stricter standards, or is it okay to meet the lesser set of standards? And how does DPW handle that? I don't know that anyone in the room has the answer to those questions tonight, but if we could get some clarification.
Sure. I think that's a fair question, and we can find the answer for you.
I'm a bit confused, just trying to figure
Sure.
out what we should be in compliance with. And I'm going to go to Councilman Stokes.
I just have a question. Is there going to require a lot of digging for this particular project?
Yes, because these tanks are located below ground, so they're completely below grade.
And the reason why I say that, in my district, the MTA opened up a new bus station over on Kirk Avenue, and it required a lot of digging, and a lot of the residents around there had damage to their house.
Mm-hmm.
So to the residents, I suggest you get a structural engineer before all that start, because they still fighting the state, because the state saying it wasn't our fault. So what I experienced, I'm asking that community association to hire a structural engineer before they start the digging, because what happened over on Kirk Avenue, the state said, oh no, it ain't our fault, and then the insurance company wouldn't pay, the state wouldn't pay, so we still going back and forth. So from my experience, I'm asking the Hamlin community if y'all can get an outside structural engineer to look at all your houses before this digging is done, because you're gonna have the same problems. Thank
Yeah, we understand your concern, and we have had the contractor go around to the houses and actually photograph the foundations of the houses before they started doing any of this work that would cause vibrations, so that they can make sure that they have it. But we do encourage the residents to take their
I
own
ain't talking
photos.
about the contract, I'm talking about the
No, I
residents need to
understand.
get an outside structural engineer.
We also have basometers located on the site, so we will be monitoring the vibrations at the site.
Thank you. Miss Patricia Truex? You're not testifying. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Is there anyone else from the public who wishes to testify? Oh, okay. Hang on. Ernest Gales? Did I say that correctly?
My name is Ernest Gales. I'm a longtime resident of the Hanlon community. I've lived there for 60 years. And this park is important to our community. I brought up a question at the last meeting that we had in reference to this in the community, and it involves around the security of the people, and particularly children, because they have assured us that they're going to be blasting, that it's going to be a controlled blast. But my concern is that because of the age of the lake, it was built in 1909, it is an earthen dam, we can't be sure what blasting is going to cause as far as structural damage to that dam. And if it appears that the dam has been compromised during the blasting, what contingency methods or what contingency plans do they have to notify the community that there could be a danger? The area below the lake, the Gwynns Falls community, Gwynns Falls Parkway, going down towards North Avenue, there's a small stream that runs down there. But if that lake if the dam gives way, that small stream can't handle the capacity of the water that's going to be going through there. And we don't expect that that's going to happen, but things do happen. Are we going to let the community know who don't come to meetings like this, or who aren't even aware of what's going on? Because many people are coming to me now asking what's going on, and this has been in plans for many years. I would hate to think that someone's 5-year-old child is going to be in the backyard playing with their puppy or their cat or their friends, and a rush of water comes through there because that dam failed. Earthen dams do fail. They fail on a regular basis around the country when there is no blasting. The other thing, even though that's most important, we are already impacted by what's going on in Druid Hill Park. We can't drive through the community. You can't get to work because they've closed off 2 lanes on Druid Park Drive. Is that the way it's going to be? Is it going to get worse than that? And what were the concerns that forced them to close 2 lanes or several lanes on Druid Hill Avenue and Ark and Trolley Terrace and Druid Park Lake Drive? Was it because of the vibrations of the cars along with the work being done? Is there a danger of these 2 dams collapsing because of the work that's being done? And we need some relief in the community with the traffic. Right now, 3 lanes go to 1 lane as you get to Druid Park in Fulton, or Ark and Trolley in Fulton. It's horrendous. You can't get to work, you can't get home. And it causes traffic accidents, which is another cost as well. So things are happening. They aren't, in the initial stages, it doesn't look like good planning was done, particularly traffic-wise. Is it just going to get worse from this point on? And I think the community needs to be made aware of what's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Daniel Hindman.
Thank you, Councilman Costello, Councilman Pinkett, and the others. My name's Dr. Daniel Hindman. I am a physician and also hold a degree in public health from Johns Hopkins. I'll keep my comments brief, but first I want to say thank you for the work that you guys do. I know it's hard to hear lots of comments and feedback, but these infrastructure elements are really important to our communities, and we appreciate your job in maintaining them. One question that has come to my mind, more from my public health background, though, is what is the requirement for DPW on projects of this caliber and quality, or this scale rather, to do an environmental impact assessment, which would have anticipated many of these negative effects and then made measures to mitigate them prior to their occurrence? And then second, when it comes to the improvements in the parks that are being promoted as possibilities for improving recreation and hence public health, what is the funding that's in place to actually make sure that those happen? Because the communities really anticipate those, which I realize I neglected to say. I live on Ark and Trolley Terrace near the DPW building, so I live very close to what's happening. And then lastly, I wanted to say as to the equity issue and the concerns about disparities and how different communities are treated. There is a long history of prior actions by the city that have been inequitable in their treatment of the communities surrounding Druid Hill Park. And that's seen in the built structure that surrounds the park, in the roads that exist, and how the communities have been systematically cut off from the park through creation of large traffic lanes, such as the 8-lane road in front of my house, which I realize in trying to mitigate that and improve those circumstances can cause difficulties to other communities. But I wanted to applaud Councilman Pinkett's efforts with the Big Jump project to improve the community's access to the park and to prioritize the neighborhood's access to its amenities for the park and the benefit of the public health. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Phyllis Reese.
Good evening, council members. My name is Phyllis Reese. I have been a resident of Ashburton for 59 years. Each time there has been a major project in our community, those sponsoring those projects have communicated with us through written material. Ashburton has one of the highest rates of cancer in the city of Baltimore. And we were very concerned on June the 19th when someone from DPW came out to tell us that there was contamination suspicions in the soil. We didn't know that. So I was listening to your remarks, and you said that the Ashburton community wanted it tested. DPW had already tested the water and the soil and saw that there was contamination. All I'm asking today, and I was very pleased to hear that the Hanlon community is on top of the game, because we basically agree with all of what the Hamden community is saying. But what I would like to ask of you, with a $150 million contract, the neighbors need to understand exactly what's going on with what's testing that they're doing with the soil and the water. So I'm asking you, with the $150,000, you can at least appropriate some monies to communicate with each resident of Hamden and also Ashburton to let us know on an ongoing basis what's happening with the project. We are looking at the project, and it's very depressing to see that the trees have been cut down, and we know that it's supposed to be a beautiful project at the end, but we want to know, as they continue to pursue this project, that we know what's going on. So that's all I have to say, but we have to have something in writing. Each person in the Ashburton community should have something in writing giving us information as to the progress of what's going on. Thank you.
Mary Demery. Well, her office is about 30 feet away in Council President Young's suite, so. Oh, no, I'm sorry, ma'am. Come on up. Yep.
My name is Portia Smith, and I'm a resident of the Hanlon community. I want to thank everyone at the Department of Public Works who has opened up this process so that we as residents could participate in some ways in the decision making. Over the past few months, we have requested that DPW set up on its website an update page for the Lake Ashburton project. To date, we have not seen any sign that DPW has in fact begun to design that website. This would give everybody in the city knowledge about how and why things are happening in Hanlon Park. We are especially concerned because we have for months been asking the Department of Public Works to execute, to sign, to execute, and submit to the Board of Estimates the Memorandum of Understanding. This gives the Neighborhood Association legal standing, and it says that we will continue to work with the City of Baltimore, and they will continue to work with us so that we will be helpful, hopefully, in monitoring things like the soil analyses, the air quality controls. To date, nothing has happened.
Ma'am, can you pull that mic down a little bit? Just
Yes.
you're on TV, so if you're not speaking into it, folks at home can't hear you clearly. Thank
Sorry
you.
about that.
That's okay. Thank
But
you.
to date, that MOU is stalled in the Department of Public Works. We want a memorandum of understanding that's been fully executed by the Board of Estimates. We want to participate in this project. We want it to be successful. We feel truly blessed that we're keeping our 2 reservoirs. But in exchange for keeping those reservoirs, we've given up more than 300 trees. We have valid reasons for being concerned about the quality of our air and our water. Your help in accomplishing this would be greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. or Miss Campbell? Lawrence, I'm sorry. Sorry about that, sir. I couldn't read the first name. My apologies.
The councilman,
Sir, yep, thank
Lawrence
you.
Campbell.
Thank you.
I'm a member of the Ashburton Association. I'm also a member, I live in Ashburton. I've been there for over 45 years. This project, I was involved with reviewing it when it first came several years ago. I had questions then, and I still have a couple questions now of DPW in regard to the soil samples and the borings. Specifically, at the last meeting we had in the community, they said that the depth of the borings was only 10 feet, but yet you're putting in tanks that go down 50 feet, correct? So why is it that you did not go down 50 feet in your borings to see what the contamination of the soil was at that level? So that's my first question. The second question is that at the community association meeting, it was asked that there would be signage put on Liberty Heights so that people could, as they rode down Liberty Heights, they would know what that project was, and so they could see that there is a specific project to help out with the community. That was more than 3 weeks ago that we had that meeting, and no sign has been put up. I think there's a place down here, that signs by tomorrow, that can put up signs that can be done in 2 days or less. And DPW and Baltimore City has the budget to be able to do that. I think that would be helpful for persons riding up and going down the corridor of Liberty Heights to be able to know what's going on in our community. And then my last question is that in regard to the contamination of the soil, the EPA regulations and the state of Maryland regulations, that disparity should not be in place. And I'll just say that because I think you know that. And I'll leave that alone.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Yes, sir.
How you doing? My name is Kevin Dorm. I guess everybody can hear me.
You can pull that up. You got to speak it in the mic so people can hear you who are
Can everybody
watching.
hear me now? Okay, all right. In my experience in contamination, you know what I mean, it goes a long way. Now, one of the lawsuits that was filed down in Anne Arundel County where some of my family members live at, the contamination came from Baltimore Gas and Electric a long ways into their drinking water. Now, I don't know how long the contamination has been in that park, and as this lady behind me from the Ashburton Association says, that people are dying from cancer. Well, people were dying down there in that community too. Apparently, it couldn't have been but so bad because Baltimore Gas and Electric decided to settle with the individuals in that community. But if you ever dug for water, which probably most of you haven't, there's springs all over the place, and you keep digging till you find water. But the contamination has to go somewhere. And as that plant down there, which was an ash plant, because Baltimore Gas and Electric burns ash, you know what I mean, from gas and electric, it spread a long ways, and people were dying. So like I'm saying before, as this woman here says, that a lot of people in Ashburton, and there's a high rate of cancer, I don't know if any of you all are qualified for soil samples, core samples, concrete samples, because they all pick the core and they pick it up, or you got too much water in the concrete, you got this or that. EPA says one thing, this one says another thing. This test is done by this one, but we don't actually know how long the contamination was in that park. My last question is that I noticed that the Department of Interior, which is the federal government, stepped in after I looked at a contract, and they said, well, we're going to invest some money in Baltimore City parks. I said, you're going to invest some money in Baltimore City parks? He said, because we control the parks, not Baltimore City Department of Recreation Center. So I'm just saying, a lot of things are not going right here, but people need to understand how this works, and it's a federal government project, even though the state's paying for it. So, you know, you had to look at contamination. You don't know what other contamination is there, you know what I mean, and how long it's been going on. So I thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman Costello. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to hear this informational hearing on, or legislative oversight as relates to the reservoirs. I want to thank everyone who was able to come out and provide testimony. Oh, there's one more.
Brenda Tucker. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening.
Please pull that down, ma'am. Thank you.
I'm a resident in the Ashburton area, and I am aware of some of what's going on in reference to the Hanlon Park, the changes, the water security, and so forth. My concern is I don't know if there has been a thought-out plan for regrowing the trees that were removed along the Liberty Heights corridor, mainly because that is a very busy freeway going downtown, and there's lots of pollution from the traffic and also the noise pollution I'm concerned about. I'd like an answer about that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilman Pickett.
Thank you, Chairman. As I was saying, I wanted to thank everyone who came down to testify on what I believe and what I think we all believe is a critical issue, not only to these communities represented here today, but to the city. And what I'm asking as a result of this hearing, that we would hear back from DPW. There were several issues that were brought to light this evening. One, and I want to list them off, and I believe that representatives from DPW have already been doing so, but there's immediate request for an MOU and the status of that. The community has been waiting for a response as it relates to that MOU, and to our knowledge, a similar MOU this would not be a request that is foreign to DPW or out of the blue. An MOU was offered to the Roland Park community or Guilford community as it relates to that site. The same consideration should have been offered to the Hanlon community, Ashburton community, without even asking for that. It should have become a part of the project, and that was not done. And so we want an MOU. It's already been said that there are concerns about the soil and potential contaminants in it. What we heard tonight was that DPW has analyzed the soil and come up to the determination that the soil has not reached the level that we should be concerned. My immediate question would be, well, who retested the soil? Was it the same contractor that didn't supply the information initially? And so are we supposed to trust that just because you said the soil is not contaminated, that it's not, and we should just move on? No, we want to know who we were told that we would be a part of the protocol and a part of understanding who this independent contractor would be selected to analyze the soil. And so if the soil has been retested and we have not been a part of it, then you just created another problem, because that was not what was promised and committed to us as a community. We want the soil removed from the site. There's been a request as it relates to the rock crushing and the air quality for our community. We don't want the rocks crushed on site. We want those rocks removed and crushed off site. The air quality impacts on our community are significant to us. The dust that will be propelled throughout the community is significant to us. If we can't trust whether the soil was contaminated, how do we even trust that the dust created from the crushing of the rocks doesn't have similar contamination? There's been a simple request about communication. If DPW is not going to send out mailers to every resident in Hanlon and Ashburton, at the least we should be able to have a website where everybody can go to and get that information. So either give us a website immediately or start mailing us the information to every household in Hanlon and Ashburton so that we have up-to-date information on this project. It's already been said that the initial testing went 10 feet, but the digging will go 50 feet. What assurance do you have that there aren't any contaminants below the 10 feet if you aren't boring and digging that deep? Show us what you're doing. And then lastly, it's a shame that the community would even have to almost beg to have adequate signage on site to, one, show the public what the project is happening and who's responsible and what's going on with the project. These are some of the things we're asking should just be, they should have already been a part of the initial request to the contractor. These are not things that should be considered add-ons as the project is moving forward. These are things that should have been done in consideration for the community first, and then the needs of the project or contractor second. And it is a shame that we have to have a hearing in order to ask for these things. And so my anticipation, my expectation is that these issues be addressed and they be addressed immediately. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilman. So my understanding is that Councilman Pinkett will be in touch with DPW to work through these things, and we will we'll determine whether or not well, we're going to reconvene on this at some point. We're not going to vote it out today. Do you have?
Sure, I can answer some of those questions we have right now. According to the equipment and all the things that are going to be provided to the site that the gentleman asked, they are going to be provided under the contract specifications. So there is no separate funding. They are included in the contract and will be provided. For the 10 feet that you were talking about, we had to go to 10 feet and then we had refusal from the borings. So we will test further after they take that first 10 feet off. So there will be additional testing to see what is lower and the contaminants, if there are any, as we go deeper and deeper. So we just did that initial 10 feet. We're going to remove that and then go deeper to get more accurate and better soil samples for those levels. The MOU, what we try to do for this project is learn what we did for Guilford. So for Guilford, we saw these issues, and these issues were brought to our attention. So this time we tried to write them into the specifications in order to help better protect the community and have a more robust system that the contractor has to follow. But we are going to follow up with the MOU with the citizens, but we did try to proactively include a lot of these things within the specifications so they are better protected. There's one. Oh, for the traffic issue around Druid, the traffic issue is a DOT issue, so we're trying to work with DOT to sort out the traffic lanes, but that's not the cause of our construction at this time at Druid. And at our monthly community meetings with each project, we are going to be talking about when there's going to be road closures, when they're going to be open, and the impacts that will have to the community. And it will provide a platform for the community to bring issues that they have forward at the time as construction is ongoing.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councilman Pinkett will be in touch with DPW and will continue to communicate with his constituents. And at some point in the near future, at Councilman Pinkett's request, we'll reconvene.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. It is my request that we not adjourn this or vote, but instead recess this hearing so that we can have this opportunity to continue to monitor the progress of this project and to have the ability to call this hearing back if we're not achieving the goals and promises as it relates to the community.
So this is a legislative oversight hearing, which is a bit different from an ordinance or a resolution. We could take one of two actions today. We could vote this out, and then it would go to the whole council, and the council would inevitably vote on this, and the matter would be closed. What Councilman Pinkett is suggesting is that we will go into recess, meaning the matter will stay open until such a time that the committee reconvenes to further discuss the matter. I just wanted to provide that clarification for folks who may not attend these hearings on a regular basis or may not be well versed in kind of that terminology. So, Councilman Pinkett, anything else? All right, DPW, thank you to everyone who attended. Thank you. Please be sure to check underneath your seats for any belongings you may have brought with you, and we are now in recess.